What made you quit a job on the spot? Story 1, nothing dramatic. After working my off during the pandemic and promised an additional bonus, I receive a low performance review conveniently timed a day before my bonus was to be paid. The low performance feedback canceled my bonus. Given all the other bullshit I was putting up with, I broke and quit. I had a nice month off, and my new job pays significantly more. Never work for people that don't appreciate you. There are always others that will. Story 2, I used to cut grass in a cemetery. I used a push lawnmower and had to lift it up onto the elevated graves and then back down and onto the next one. Over and over and over. Minimum wage was $4.25 an hour. After an hour of cutting grass in the August heat, I sit down for my break, and this guy named Leroy asks, "Was that worth $4.25 to you?" I quit the next day. Thanks, Leroy. Story 3, asked for a raise and was told okay. Next morning, Friday, I was told by the same person who agreed with the raise that I should put a few more years in, and then we'll talk again, lock my toolbox at the end of the day, and call the tow truck to pick it up. Shop manager was shocked that next Monday to find an empty spot where my tools were and couldn't understand why I left. Story 4, my grandfather, who I consider like a father, passed away after a long stay in hospital. We were closer than he was with his own kids, and our bond was quite special. I spoke to my manager about getting the day of his funeral off, since I was organizing part of the arrangements and having a day or two of bereavement leave, and he agreed. The day of the funeral finally comes, and the staff start calling me, leaving me messages asking why I'm not on my shift, and telling me, while I'm in a suit hosting family members at the funeral home, that I have to find someone to replace me or face repercussions. Needless to say, I told them to figure it out and never looked back. Story 5, walked into the interview. Everything went well, accepted the job offer, went to the front desk to do the paperwork, and noticed that the contract had a different pay amount and that I would be interning for the first month for 100 week. I asked first about the amount difference, was told, "Oh, this is the standard contract. It just hasn't been updated for your specific offer." I told them they'd need to edit and initial the changes before I would sign. "Oh, that's not how things work here." I thanked them for their time and left without signing anything. They called me back on the day. I was supposed to have started asking where I was. I told them because didn't sign a contract, I was never an employee. Oh boy, that was a fun call. Story 6, worked for a privately owned bakery for exactly 1 week. The owner's son comes in, walks past the counter and into the bathroom. He comes out a few minutes later without acknowledging me or my coworker, gets into his car and drives away. We both looked at each other, then opened the door only to find this guy literally all over the toilet seat and the toilet paper holder. I called the owner, told her what happened, and she said to deal with it. So I asked my coworker if she wanted to clean it up because I wasn't going to. She declined, and I told her I was walking out. She did as well. We locked up the store and told the owner we quit, but would reconsider staying if her son came back to clean up his own mess. She yelled and berated us for 20 seconds before I said goodbye and hung up. Story 7, not me, but a middle-aged tradesman. Where I work underground, and it isn't for everybody. Terrible environment and whatnot. This particular individual starting working, and after a few weeks decided that it wasn't for him. Bad conditions and hostile supervisor. He approached the boss at the morning meeting and told him that he wasn't going underground and that he was quitting. The boss told him that he had to give him 2 weeks notice, and without missing a beat, the guy replied, "For the next 2 weeks, you're going to notice that I'm not here." Turned around, packed his, and left. Was never heard from again. Story 8, I worked for T-Mobile store authorized reseller, not an actual dealer. 1 week, I had an amazing week, sold 55 phones. Brand new activations on a business account with 55 high-end phones at that time. When I got my next check, they said my paperwork was not in order, and thus they couldn't pay me. As a side note, they always told us to make copies of all paperwork in case this happened, so you can show it to the manager and get it resolved within a day. I went over my backup paperwork with my boss. He said everything looked to be in order, and he would have the office cut me a check. I went to the office, and they told me it was still not in order. I immediately gave them my store key and quit on the spot. I did go through collections, and they did settle before I took them to court. The company did go out of business after a few years because they tried that with many other employees and eventually lead to an investigation by the government. According to an old coworker, I bumped into years later. Story 9, worked as a cashier in a local shop. One night, 2 guys came at me with knives trying to get in the till. I just walked away and said have at it, as it wasn't worth the minimum wage to get into it, with a couple of guys waving knives at me. After they ran out the store, I picked up my mobile and called the police, then called the store manager. The next day, the district manager meets me as I turn up for my shift the very next day. Her first words were, "It was very unprofessional of me to be on my phone while in work." I laughed at her and told her she could take this as my notice and walked out. I never had a problem with being held up, but the sheer gall of that got me. Edit. Fat fingered a spelling mistake. Story 10, I got mugged on a delivery for Domino's. and came back to the shop crying and panicked, had my phone, wallet, and pizza taken, told my manager what happened, and on, "Are you hurt? No, but I lost my phone and wallet. I need to call the police, no time for that. Hey, race your next delivery." It was like 2 blocks from where I was just mugged. I just went home. The police never really did much to get my phone and wallet back. Not like they could. Story 11 began working at a Persian restaurant in the kitchen. I overcooked a steak slightly. The owner came back for a plate at us, then a hot meat skewer before storming off to his office. I dropped my apron, grabbed my bag, and told him I was leaving. His response was, "Okay, at the end of the night, you can go." My response was clearly, "You don't understand. I'm leaving right now. Hey, erase my parking pass. They'll expect my check in the mail." Story 12, I worked at McDonald's when I was 16. We used to get a free McDouble or hot and spicy with a small fries and drink for a lunch break. One day when I went on break, the franchise owner was there, and when he noticed I asked for cheese on the hot and spicy, he attempted to make me pay for the whole meal because cheese wasn't free. I thought he was joking, so I laughed and started walking toward the break room until he yelled at me not to walk away from him in front of customers and my coworkers. I couldn't believe it. This grown, successful businessman was hounding its 16-year-old for a slice of cheese. Told him I wasn't going to pay, put the food down, and walked out. They tried calling me to come to work that weekend. I told them no thanks and never went back. Story 13, OL. I had an inside hint from HR that there was about to be mass layoffs, and my name was on the list. I scheduled my week-long vacation, and returning the day before layoffs were presumed to have happened, my boss reamed me out for daring to take a vacation. She said I would never advance in the company if I chose such a formative time in a project to take a vacation. She told me I would never be an executive producer if I went on a vacation before project launch, even though I wouldn't be able to touch it for the week. I was away anyways, and that I would always be known in the television industry as lazy. I chilled, took my vacation, and returned. She was mad and said that she was upset with me for having left and made her take care of my project for me. Chewed me out in front of the entire company in the conference room. I chilled and was like, "Aren't you laying off a bunch of us tomorrow? I'm just waiting for you to fire me so I can collect unemployment." Entire room literally starts panicking, and management tries to understand how I knew about layoffs. It was my one true Regina George causing chaos moment in my life. Story 14, I am a physician assistant and took a job in urgent care. After working there for about a month, I noticed some irregularities, such as some medications being expired and sometimes a lack of supplies. I wrote that off as the office manager not being as astute as she should have been and brought it up to the doctor who owned the place. He said he would talk to her and straighten it out. Then one of the medical assistants came to me and said, "You know this has been going on forever, right?" She then said that things would never change and to get used to it because the expired medications have been on the shelf for months and they were told to never throw them out. She then also told me that the autoclave, the machine that sterilizes instruments, was broken, and all they did was wash the instruments in soap and water and put them in the autoclave anyway to get them as clean as possible. That was the end of that. I made out a formal complaint to the state medical board and never showed up again. The state actually came in the very next day and raided the place. They shut him down immediately. They found so many things wrong that not only did they keep the place out of business, they suspended his license. He was also prosecuted on federal charges because he was running a scam for truck driver physical exams. Story 15, worked for a restaurant pub. The owner would come in with his buddies for hours at a time, a lot of times forcing the bartender to stay way past close serving them. Obviously was told not to charge anything because it's the owner's party after hours of drinks on the house. No tip. Not even for the owner. This started to happen frequently. Usually we'd put up with it if they'd leave or be done before close. Then we started hearing that the kitchen staff hadn't been paid in a month. Bartenders were being paid because we made like $4 an hour, but the kitchen wasn't a tipped kitchen and made a decent wage. Turns out the owner was a total drunk, which should have been obvious, and buried himself in debt. A week later, we were told our checks weren't there on the day they were supposed to be. Then 2 days later, still no checks. I told them if my check wasn't there tomorrow, I want to come in for my shift. They said it came. I got there, and they said, well, what I meant was it's actually on the way. I talked to and I walked out. I later found out no checks were ever issued there again. They tried to pay some people cash, but it fell apart very soon after. Edit for those guessing the place. This was about 12 years ago, and it went out of business not too long after I left. Someone else bought it, renamed it, and made it work. And now I believe it's still there and operating quite well. Story 16, I worked for an attorney. I was 7 months pregnant. I was supposed to be a secretary, but instead I was constantly being sent out as a process server. In July, at the end of my 3 months, August, I was supposed to get a raise, and she said that she couldn't give me a raise. The day she said that, I left at lunch and never went back. She was an awful person, and the guy I replaced told me that he felt sorry for me on my first day. As he was leaving, I should have left that day. Story 17, I got blamed for something that wasn't my fault. Was in an argument with our VP or marketing because I had the audacity to suggest a solution that would have avoided our problem instead of accepting fault for something I didn't do. He told me he doesn't pay me to think, so that was my last day. Story 18, I worked at Walmart for a short time. I worked as hard as I possibly could to unload their pallets of merchandise. I always thought I was so fast. I studied the process and I believed I perfected it. Every single day my manager came up to me and told me I needed to be faster. So I did. And the fast pace made me lose a little focus, causing me to break a finger. I let management know that I might be a little slower due to my injury, and they straight up told me we won't tolerate any laziness and wrote me up when I didn't meet their ridiculous standards. So I went home after my shift and never returned. Never called, never formally quit. I just never came back. Walmart, I was at a company for about a year and a half as an assistant project manager. In that year and a half, I had 3 different bosses, the newest one being a heavy micromanager. I was getting paid about 20 below the standard salary for the position, overworked without any additional compensation, and the overall culture of the company was just flawed. My boss started nitpicking my work at the end of the day. I told her I had plenty of time to get it done before the end of the day, but she kept pushing and escalating. She was borderline screaming, and I just cut her off and said, I'm not doing this anymore. I quit. She yelled back, well, I need it in writing, and I said back with the straightest face, I don't have to do in writing. I quietly packed all my stuff up, said good luck to my coworkers, and left. A year later, after working a couple of other jobs, I accepted a project manager position with a competing company and make almost twice as much as I was making at the previous. And I get to post on Reddit while at work without getting yelled at. Story 19, fun times. Working at a grocery store when I was a teenager, I was still out on my own, but working anything I could to make ends meet. I guess I didn't work hard enough being a one-man crew in front of the store manager who decided to tell me to go faster, impossible, and do even better for my 4.25-hour. I tried explaining I was going as fast as personally possible when he decided to say you'll do what you were told. As fast as you were told if you want to keep this job. You should be so lucky, decided right then. And their bro, I'd rather starve than work for some stupid whose high point in life is the assistant manager at a below grocery store. Quit on the spot. Edit, holy jeez. Never expected this to blow up this fast or like this at all. That being said, never compromise your self-worth for a job. You're worth more than that, and you should bet on yourself always. Story 20, I was asked to lie to parents and cover up a kid failing in elementary school by support staff. When I confronted the principal about it, he said that she was just doing her job, and I was not a team player for not doing so. So I explained the situation. Same response, I should have helped in covering it up. As soon as kids went home, I started emptying my desk. Story 21, I get a job at a restaurant. First day, I show up, and the heat is broken in the dead of winter. It was like 35 degrees. I asked the cooks if it's always like this, and they say yes. I walked immediately. Story 22, I was 18. On my lunch, a drunk manager came in the break room, asked me a bunch on invasive personal questions, and when I was curt and evasive, she exited the room, closed the door, and announced to the office what a gather my stuff and walked out. An assistant manager followed me out and tried to block my car from pulling out of the parking lot. I pulled around him and left. Heard later that the story going around the office was that I almost ran him down in the parking lot. Not even close. Had a job about 10 years ago doing tech support for an ISP for a week. The pay was minimum wage bonuses you earn for selling people stuff, and by stuff I mean terrible, overpriced services that you can get online for free. I was still in a phase of training where I had a supervisor listening in on my calls, and after a call, he told me I should have paused to try and sell him some shitty antivirus service before I fix his problem. Handed him my headset right there. Felt so skeevy when people call you for help, and you have to turn into a telemarketer. Story 23, worked at a restaurant as a server, which has catered a large wedding reception. The owner's wife was chatting with the wedding party all night and occasionally getting the drinks. At the end of the night, she said she's taking her share of the tips since she helped so much. I say fine even though that's illegal in our state. An hour and a half after the party ends, the restaurant is still a mess, and the owner's wife is just standing around talking while I was supposed to clean up. It was almost midnight, and I'd worked my other job earlier that day. I walked out without saying a word. They ended up giving me all of my tips on my last check. Story 24, the boss wanted my team to work extra shifts without weekends to finish a project next milestone, so we can show the client that we are capable of finishing before the due date. We worked 14 hours daily for 4 weeks with no weekends, and the last 2 days we worked for 36 hours straight with no breaks since the due date was a day to one way. Everyone was and on the edge. No smiles, no small talks, nothing, and we don't get paid overtime. After finishing the milestone, he thanked us and called us for a meeting, saying we have to continue working like this for an unknown period until they hire new staff members. I refused with another colleague and said we will work for what we get paid for, which is 9 hours per day, 5 days a week. He didn't take us seriously, but we didn't give at that moment. We worked the next 2 weeks accordingly. He called us and said that he was extremely disappointed and that we don't value the company. I walked out, collected my stuff, faced my resignation letter to the HR, and said bye. Story 25. I worked at a certain children's entertainment place known for having birthday parties with pizza and a rat mascot. I was a party hostess. Little boy, probably 7 or so, took a really long time to blow out his candles. So I leaned in. He was making his wish for man's name to stop touching him. I immediately went to my manager with it. He told me that I couldn't do anything with this information. At the time, I wanted to discuss it with the mother. So I quit on the spot and reported it to the police. I have no idea if anything came of it. Edit, I also want to mention, this was a franchise. A location connected to corporate may have had a different stance. Who knows? Story 26. Going to the toilet pre-meeting to negotiate a raise. I heard both directors of the company's small firm. Everything ran through them talking outside the window that they were going to flat out refuse any offers and make the work overtime to prove his loyalty, and he has no prospects anyway. Where will he go? Entered the meeting with my signed and printed resignation in hand, slapped it on the table after sitting down, and stood straight back up, saying meeting over. I now work for a successful company, part of a brilliant team of 10 people, amazing pension, terrific bonuses, and obtainable progression with a great work-life balance. Half day every single Friday, till I die. Also, if you're being mistreated at a job, overworked, underpaid, whatever it may be, get your affairs in order and walk. Story 27. I was already having a bad day. My transfer request was denied, and supervisors were on my like they owned it. Nearing my lunch break, I was stopped by a customer asking about a price check. Me, not able to do a price check, said please take it up to the front. They can help you there. Wasn't good enough. The customer proceeds to berate me, almost making me cry. Finally, she says, how about you just go kill yourself? Like what? Knowing that management wouldn't do anything, I just left that being abused for minimum wage. Not worth it, being hired to sell cars. Then in the middle of training, I get pulled aside and told I'm being moved to lot attendant. That position paid minimum wage, and I didn't even get a chance to be on the sales floor. Left and never went back. I was in my mid-20s at the time and was trying to find a possible career. Didn't have time for that bullshit bait and switch. Story 28. I was working at one of those stands that sells flash frozen ice cream droplets. You know the ones? It was at an amusement park. At one point, it's a hot summer day, and I'm standing in the sun in front of my minus 40-degree freezer, simultaneously burning and freezing at the same time. I have a long line of customers because I was near the exit to a stunt show featuring a particular superhero that is a knight of the darkness. I scoop some ice cream into the plastic tray, slide my scoop over the top to knock off the excess ice cream quickly, and then hand it to the customer in exchange for their money. A wild manager appears. Suddenly a manager tells me I didn't level off the ice cream correctly. He takes the scoop and small bowl from my hands and levels it off just like I had done for the precious customer. He then dumps it out back into the freezer and makes me do it again while standing over my shoulder. Mind you, I still have a long line of customers, so I do it again, and this time he also is not pleased and berates me some and makes me dump it out and do it again, so I do literally the same thing a third time, and this time he's somehow fine with it and wanders off to go annoy another teenager making minimum wage. So now I am confused as to what I was doing wrong and have a line of customers staring at me, leaving me thoroughly embarrassed. I process to overfill every container and hand them out to each customer, while not taking any money from them. Then I simply walked out to my car and drove home. I never turned off or secured my register. I never formally quit. I never said a word to anyone. I just walked away. If I was doing something wrong, then fine. But there is no time where it's appropriate to scold and reprimand an employee in front of customers, and I haven't been back to that amusement park as an employee or customer since. Story 29. I watched a dude cut his hand off from the wrist up on a faulty saw machine, and they only stopped working long enough to clean the blood up. Something didn't sit right with me about that. I walked out. Story 30. After working at a company for 5 years with a set schedule, having weekends off, we got a new supervisor that told me no one gets set schedules here, and told me I'd have no weekend day, and they would be split. Story 31. I worked at a sushi restaurant, and we had secret menu items that no one went over with me. The owner was sitting with a guest, I guess they were friends, and he ordered one of the secret menu items, and I said, I'm sorry, we don't have that. And she immediately stands up and started to scream at me and called me an idiot and then snapped her fingers saying calling the other servers over. At this point, I was taking my apron off and grabbing my keys to walk out of there. I had a very stressful job and was expected to answer Slack messages from my boss at any time, or I would be fired. He was in a different time zone, so often I would be woken up at 3 a.m. being yelled at to do something. One day in the office, he was talking about me on Slack and accidentally posted it to a channel I was in. I was killing myself for this guy, and he didn't even appreciate it. I packed up and left. Best thing I've ever done. Story 32. I was working for a financial company in SoCal for about a month at the time. It was a little stuffy, but otherwise okay, until my manager came over and asked why I took so long in the bathroom. Literally 5 minutes to take a dump. He mentioned something about having to count it as a break and me being more careful in the future or something. I laughed, handed him my badge, and left. Story 33. Upper manager bullied a co-worker until he killed himself. Then the manager turned his attention on me, yelling at me in front of subordinates, yelling at me over the radio, sabotaging my workload and projects. I simply said, "No, dude, I don't care who you are or how much money I'm making," and not accepting that level of abuse. I walked out and called the district manager, told him I left my credentials in his office and won't be back. When I had my exit interview, I was very honest and was offered a lateral promotion to a sister company. But the taste in my mouth was simply too sour. Story 34. I was already there 3 hours past the time my shift was supposed to end, along with everyone else who was on my shift. We were all very PO'd. I get that you often have to stay after when you work in food service, but everyone for the next shift was already there, and there was zero reason for us to be there for 3 extra hours. Finally, someone asked to go home, and the manager started screaming in the middle of the restaurant floor that just because your shift is supposed to end at 10 doesn't mean you get to leave then. I tell you, when you get to leave, you are all just numbers on a spreadsheet to US. We can replace you in a heartbeat if you don't want to be here. So I dropped all the money on the table in front of her and said, "Replace me then." You found out later that they lost near half their staff that night because most others follow my lead after. There was a huge football game the next day right across the street from the place, and they got to deal with that with no servers. I went to the game and had the time of my life, LOL. It was an IHOP. Story 35. It was Thanksgiving Day at Kmart. I was a teenager, and I had been working nonstop for 5 hours because of all the good deals. I had a drink under my register, and I took one drink of it. The assistant manager looked at me, but didn't say anything. 10 minutes later, it was time for my much-needed 30-minute lunch. I proceeded to ask for coverage for my break, and the assistant manager told me I didn't get a lunch since I took a drink of my Sprite. I then proceeded to tell her too bad and walked away and got all of my stuff out of my locker and started walking out to the parking lot. Then the store managers all rushed out begging me to come back and work and apologize. They said I could take my lunch. They even had the assistant manager pathetically apologize to me. I think she got in big trouble because she never treated me like it anymore. Story 36. Call centers man. Been at the job near 4 months when an employee passed out behind me at his desk with a heroin needle in his arm. Managers had someone call 911 while they quickly grabbed all of the dude's drugs and needles and stashed in a locker. After the ambulance loaded him up, another employee asked me if I want to take my break and snort an 8-ball with them. I walked up to a manager and peaced out. Story 37. I was getting married. I had a temp job and told them on my first day that I needed a weekend off in a couple of months for my wedding. I reminded them every couple of weeks, had on the calendar, and even reminded them that Monday that weekend came. And I was on the schedule. I told my boss that I needed it off for my wedding, and she said, "You're just a kid. Can't you move it? We really need the parts." Admittedly, I was 21 marrying my 19-year-old girlfriend, but yeah, I laughed at her and left. We were scheduled Saturday and Sunday, 2 attendance points, and you're fired. So I assumed that I'd be job hunting on Monday after my wedding. I went to another temp agency on Monday and had a job lined up for Monday evening. On Tuesday, the temp job called and asked if I was coming back. I told that person, the temp agency lady, what they'd done to me. She was upset that they'd done that, tried to get me to go back, but I liked the new job and stayed there. Story 38. Worked a retail job as a cashier at store whose name sounds like hose. One part of that job, as I'm sure many who have shopped there know, is to sign customers up for a rather predatory credit card. We were supposed to ask every customer, no matter the dollar amount of the transaction. Well, I was helping a woman and told her she could save X if she signed up for the credit card. She seemed interested, but I could clearly tell that English was not her first language. I grabbed one of our pamphlets and made it abundantly clear to her that this is a credit card, not a rewards account or something of that nature. When she understood, she said, "Oh no, not today." Understandable. Well, I didn't know one of my supervisors was standing behind me. After she left, he asked why I did all of that. And if I try to talk every interested customer out of signing up, when I explained myself, he said, "Next time, sign them up. They don't know any better handed in my red vest." That was it. Story 39. I worked at a Dollar General for about a month. That's all I could put up with. The big thing I struggled with was how I was constantly criticized for not stocking shelves well. But I was never given specific direction as to how I was to improve at my shelf stocking. Literally, some like "you're stocking shelves poorly." Do better was what I got told by the manager many times. Cracking under this pressure on the last day, I worked a full shift. I poured all of my might into what I believed to be the best shelf stocking I'd ever done for that hole. I cleaned the bathroom spotless, but there was never a complaint about that anyways. I even had the key holder assistant manager type figure check all of my work on the shelves and bathroom, where I was met with praise and confirmation. To answer this Reddit question, the manager greeted me at the door the next morning for a run-through of my performance, where I was naive enough to believe that I was finally getting the pat on the back I had wanted so badly. Instead, she tried to convince me that I left a huge stain in the men's room toilet bowl and left her with my worst stocking job yet. I got mad, told her that I felt as though I was being treated unfairly. She told me that she was sorry that I couldn't take criticism. I told her that I was sorry that she had to pull applications and find a new sales associate to deal with her bullshit. Know your worth, people. Story 40, not on the spot, but I was passed over for a promotion for a role ID, been doing unofficially for 6 months. There was no official position for it when I started doing it. It was one of the manager's responsibilities, and they delegated it to me. Honestly, I was happy to do it, and I was frequently praised for how efficient and thorough I was doing it. So when official position opened up to do it full-time, I seemed like the obvious choice. A bunch of my coworkers didn't even apply for it, because they told me they didn't think there was any point since I was obviously getting the job. They gave it to a guy that worked in a different department and had no experience using the complicated system required for that job. Then the manager asked me to train him in it. Except I wasn't really asked. I was told in a way that sounded like it was asking. We called it being voluntold. I refused. I said to the manager, if I'm not good enough to get the job, I'm not good enough to teach someone else how to do it. The manager then accused me throwing a temper tantrum. I quit about a week later. Honestly, that wasn't the only reason. That was just the straw that broke the camel's back. Even the other managers couldn't believe he said that. Story 41, I worked for a placement agency at a manufacturing facility. I had worked 7 of my 8-hour day when one of the supervisors came by to ask anyone on the crew I was on if they would stay for another 4 hours. We all looked at each other and politely declined. They came back one more time to ask, and again, we declined. Then they came back and demanded that one of us stay behind for the 4-hour shift, or all of us were going to be written up for attendance. This pissed everyone off, but because we were work placement instead of employees, we were unsure who to talk to. Some of the other crew told the supervisor they can't because they have to pick up their kids, etc. When the supervisor left, the crew had multiple people saying they can't get written up again or they would lose their job. I'd scheduled a dinner with my in-laws, so I called the husband and told him the situation and that I would stay. Told the crew he'll stay. Don't worry. Told the supervisor. Got put on another crew that had worked for 1 hour, but was required to stay for the full 4 hours. Next day, I called the main office and explained the situation. They said they had a representative on-site due to this manufacturer being such a large client. Called the on-site representative and explained the situation. Was told they have a lot of attendance issues. Again, explained I had never had attendance issues, and everyone on my crew was threatened with being written up for not staying 4 hours after their scheduled shift. On-site representative still defended the actions of the supervisor and threw attitude at me. Fine, I don't need you, I quit. And that's the story of how I learned about my workers' rights and workplace harassment.